Busy, Philippa?
Yes, Harold. I've got a nice little murder on the boil, thank you.
It's all right for some.
Why? What are you supposed to be doing?
Boring fraud case. 9 boxes of evidence. Blokes with trusses bringing it in. The jury won't understand it and the judge will fall asleep. No, you're much better off with a murder. There's a bit more life in it.
Well, it's only an attempted murder, really. They didn't get as far as the corpse, just hands round the throat. You know the feeling?
Oh, man and wife, eh? Yes, well, there you are. Marriage guidance doesn't work for everyone.
No, uncle and nephew, actually. Only the nephew didn't quite manage to finish the job.
Why, is he in the building trade?
Car rentals.
Yes, caught in the act, eh? What's his defence?
He was walking in his sleep, my lad, it says there.
No, dodgy defence, that, sleepwalking. I can remember I had a case like that once, a few years ago. Yes, the Crown versus Harris.
Oh, I'll look it up.
This woman claimed to have killed her husband during the course of a nightmare. She choked him with a hot water bottle. She said in court that she dreamt she was stuffing a turkey.
Wrong end, surely. Or was it nouvelle cuisine?
The jury rather gallantly brought in a verdict of not guilty.
Oh, good.
But insane.
Not good.
So she's still inside now, 20 years later. Of course, if they'd found her sane but guilty, she'd have been out years ago. I just thought you'd like to know that. Can I have a flower?
Yes, you may have a flower, Harold. Yes, the trouble is, though, Mr. Goff, the defence you're putting up in legal terms is called automatism. That is an act done without any control of the mind.
A sort of involuntary action, Mr. Goff, a bit like tapping your knee with a hammer if you do that at all.
Yes. Unfortunately, this defence rarely, if ever, succeeds, for the good reason that if it did, it would licence any crime you care to mention.
Why should I try and kill him? I've no grudge against him. He's my favourite uncle.
How many uncles have you got?
Well, just the one.
Arthur, could you hold your medical examinations at some other time, if you don't mind? Now, your uncle's will, Mr. Goff, an estate of over £250,000 and you the sole beneficiary.
But he never even told me he'd made a will.
He told the Crown Prosecution Service. If we're going to build a case for the defence, we need a reason why you should have walked in your sleep. Now, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but did you, for example, say, fall off your bicycle as a child once, maybe, and fracture your skull?
Me? No, never.
Or maybe you knocked your head on the side of a swimming pool and were concussed?
Me? No, not swimming.
Well, you must have hit your head at some point during your life, Mr. Goff, if only against the wall in frustration.
Oh, right, with you. Something did happen, actually, I was going to mention. On the afternoon of that Saturday, I played rugby, and during the match, I was injured, kicked in the head. So maybe I could have had some kind of blackout or something.
Kicked in the head, yes, that could be very useful. Yes, that was lucky, wasn't it, Arthur?
Oh, yes. Very lucky indeed. You're a very lucky young man. There aren't many young men in your situation who've had the good fortune of having their heads kicked. Excuse me, a touch of sinus.
Will he last the case?
Nothing the matter with him. Fittest man in the legal profession. Aren't you, Arthur? So, what have you got now?
Farmer's lung, Mrs. Troy. I should never have bought that strimmer.
You haven't got farmer's lung, Arthur. It's just wind. Now, look, this case. The prosecution are bound to produce expert medical evidence to show that Goff couldn't possibly have walked in his sleep.
Yes, more than likely.
So, we'd better produce our expert medical evidence to show that he did.
Can we assume we'll get it, though? And our expert might agree with the prosecution.
Then make sure you get one who doesn't. Shop around. Find someone who's biased in our favour.
Yes, all right, as you say, Mrs. Troy.
Oh, and don't get a doctor who's been struck off for malpractice again. Try and find one who doesn't interfere with his patients this time.
I shall try, but it's not easy to find.
And then try and find a witness from that rugby match who may have seen Goff get kicked in the head. Get one of your men in grubby raincoats onto it.
No, I don't think the senior partners will want to get involved, Mrs. Troy.
Get Staunchley or whatever his name is. Do you think he did it, Arthur?
I always think they did it, Mrs. Troy. That's why I'm not a barrister. I couldn't stand up and defend a person I thought was guilty.
It's all right for me to do it, though.
Oh, yes, it's all right for you to do it, Mrs. Troy. Yes.
Farmer's lung.
Mr. Amster, may I begin by asking, are you a regular church attender?
Beg pardon?
My lord, my learned friend has only been on his hind legs for 10 seconds and he's handing out his pamphlets. I've heard of Jehovah's Witnesses, my lord, but never Jehovah's barristers.
Yes, Mr. Triggs, must we open every examination by establishing church-going credentials? And would you make your objections a little less objectionable, Mrs. Troy? Troy we may be, Helen of Troy we are not.
Boring old fart.
Continue, Mr. Triggs.
My lord. Now, Mr. Anstey, how long have you been a lodger in the house?
Since early January last year.
Ah, yes, since Epiphany.
Or the winter sales.
Sorry, Mrs. Troy.
Touch of sinus, my lord.
Now, you returned to the house unexpectedly on the night in question. Why was that?
I had gone for a weekend's windsurfing, but the weather turned bad, so I came back early.
And did Mr. Goff know you'd gone away for the weekend?
Yeah, I go windsurfing most weekends if it's fine. Or if it's wet, I go diving, then that way I can stay out of the rain.
Eminently sensible, Mr. Anstey. So when you returned unexpectedly, at what time was that?
It'd be about 1 in the morning.
And on entering the house, what did you see?
Well, it wasn't what I saw so much as what I heard. I heard this sort of grunting noise coming from upstairs. At first I thought it was Bob. I thought maybe he had his girlfriend up there, because they tend to make a bit of noise.
So, you thought it was him grunting?
No, I thought it was his girlfriend grunting. It's one of the reasons I go away at the weekend.
Objection, my lord. My client's sex life is of no relevance to this case.
Yes, granted. Granted, Mrs. Troy. Mr. Triggs, continue and keep it above the bracing.
My lord. So you heard a noise, what then?
Well, it was plainly coming from his uncle's room, and the door was half open, so I looked in. And there was Bob, sort of leaning over his uncle, and he was holding his pillow over his face and choking him. Well, when I finally got it off him, he'd gone blue.
And how blue had he gone, Mr. Anstey? Was he slightly blue or truly blue?
Is it important, Mr. Triggs, to know exactly how blue Mr. Powell had gone? He's not, after all, a piece of litmus paper, is he?
On the contrary, my lord, I believe it will tell us how near to death the victim was.
Oh, very well. Mr. Anstey?
I suppose he was a bit the colour of my tie.
Your tie? Oh, yes, there was obvious reason to be concerned then. Very good.
And did Mr. Goff ever speak to you of any expectation with regard to his uncle's estate?
Yeah, I think he did expect to inherit it eventually.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Anstey, you say you saw the victim and that he had gone blue.
That's right, yeah.
Could you be more specific? Was that blue or more blue-grey?
Well, yeah, blue-grey, I suppose.
More blue than grey or more grey than blue?
Maybe more grey than blue, perhaps.
Oh, predominantly grey, then, I see. Thank you. Now, Mr. Goff's uncle didn't go out of the house much, I understand.
No, not a lot.
What was his normal complexion?
He was a bit grey-looking, I suppose.
Oh, I see. So his normal complexion was grey, and when you found him, he was grey. So in other words, he looked pretty much the same as usual.
I suppose so, yeah.
So when you imply that he looked half dead when you found him, half dead was the best he ever looked anyway.
Well, I'm not saying he didn't.
Are you saying he did?
No, I'm not saying he did. I'm just not saying he didn't.
Well, if two negatives make a positive, Mr. Anstey, and you aren't not saying that he didn't, and you aren't not saying that he did, what exactly are you saying?
I'm not sure now.
Thank you. No further questions.
I wish to call Mr. Edward Powell.
Call Mr. Edward Powell.
Speaking to us as a regular attender at the Evangelical Tabernacle, Mr. Powell.
My lord, this is irrelevant character building. Even Adolf Hitler went to church occasionally.
Yes, Mr. Triggs, a bit more law. The mightless tabernacle wouldn't go amiss.
I just thought it might be of interest for the jury, my lord. They seem like God-fearing men. And ladies. So, when you awoke on the night in question, Mr. Powell, what did you awake to find?
My nephew, with a pillow in his hand, standing by the bed.
And was he awake or asleep?
I don't know. I assume he was awake. But before I could say anything to him, he attacked me.
Now, some months ago, you made a will in your nephew's favour. Was that because you were fond of him?
No, it's because he is my only living relative, and I promised his mother I'd leave him something. I thought he was feckless. All he ever did was get into debt and write his car off.
So, plainly having no affection for your nephew, why did you ever have him in the house?
Well, I was sorry for him, and I'd promised his mother. Anyway, if I hadn't taken him in, he'd probably be out in the streets now with a dog and a bit of string asking if he had any change.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Powell, during the course of the incident, can you be certain that your nephew was aware of what he was doing?
No, but I'm pretty sure I was aware of it, though.
Did you say anything to him?
Yeah, I tried to tell him to get off. And it's difficult to make yourself understood with half a pillow in your mouth.
Did you hear him say anything to you then? Or did you have half a pillow in your ear as well?
Yeah, he said, "You wash the dishes now, you old..." And then he used an abusive word, my lord, reflecting on my parentage.
Bastard, was it, Mr. Powell?
It wasn't no fun, Your Honour.
I think the witness means it wasn't any fun, my lord. Double negative again.
Thank you, Mrs. Troy. Your concern to find the appropriate word is most commendable.
Laudable, my lord.
And irritating.
Thank you. No other questions? Not good.
I wish to call the medical witness for the Crown, Mr. James Hargreaves.
Call Mr. John Carsleeves.
Ah, Mr. Hargreaves, you say in your report that you found no evidence of any dysfunction of the accused, no injuries or contusions, no defects of reaction or comprehension compatible with a recent concussion or a blow to the head.
No, absolutely none at all.
Now, in your experience, Mr. Hargreaves, both as a medical expert and as a frequent fundraiser for missionaries abroad...
My lord, Mr. Hargreaves' experience as a hellraiser has nothing to do with his evidence, I submit.
I said that he was a fundraiser, my lord, not a hellraiser.
I don't care if the witness raises chickens, Mr. Triggs. I warn counsel on both sides to keep a modicum of decorum in this case. Continue.
Say there had been a concussion, what would the expected reaction to it be?
Well, it's variable. Dizziness maybe, nausea, seeing lights, headaches, even blackouts.
But not sleepwalking?
Not in my opinion, no. I'd say Mr. Goff is as sane and as responsible for his actions as you, me, or any member of the jury.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hargreaves. No further questions.
Mr. Hargreaves, I have here a copy of the Daily Telegraph, June '91, which reports on a successful appeal for a wrongful conviction. The grounds were that this conviction was based on forensic evidence which has since proved unreliable. Can you tell us who gave the medical evidence at that trial?
My lord, I fail to see the relevance of this line of questioning.
You surprise me, Mr. Triggs. It seems pretty obvious from up here. Go on, Mrs. Troy.
Do you know who gave the original and subsequently discredited forensic evidence, Mr. Hargreaves?
Yes, I did. But the fact is...
Thank you. No further questions.
That would conclude the most impressive and extremely convincing case for the Crown, my lord.
Very well, we will adjourn now for lunch. Now, I would recommend the Afro-Caribbean takeaway on the corner to the members of the jury. For a moderately priced, highly nutritious and very tasty lunch, you can do a lot worse than the curried goat and peas with tuna dumplings. We will resume at 2:15.
All will rise.
Peter the Hedgehog nipped back home for lunch. I wonder what's in the larder today, he thought. Maybe some nice juicy worms. Suddenly he heard a voice say...
Oh, you're back then, Mrs. Troy. I've got a few briefs for you. I thought you were in court.
I'm on lunch.
Is that a Prickly Peter story there you're doing?
Is that a door there on which you didn't knock?
Yeah, we used to read them to our two when they were young.
You're two? I'm not that old, am I?
Yes. Anyway, we had to stop because they were giving them nightmares.
My stories have never given anyone nightmares. It must have been the garlic you put in their cocoa.
Actually, Mrs. Troy, I don't know how you're fixed with your publisher, but I've always fancied myself as a bit of a writer. I've had this idea for some short stories about a barrister's clerk.
Oh, yes, have you? Yes.
By day, he's a barrister's clerk, but at night, he is the avenger of the courts. Have you got a moment?
Well, I must get back, actually, so why don't you just talk into that machine and I'll listen to it later.
Oh, yes, right, cheers. The Avengers of the Courts, Part 1. It was a wet and foggy day down the Gray's Inn Road when a taxi bearing a mysterious pattern... There isn't a tape in here!
Mr. Goff, what has happened to your face?
It was very strange, Mrs. Troy. I dozed off during the lunchtime recess, you see.
When, lo and behold, I began to walk in my sleep, just as on the night in question, and I banged my head, sustaining some visible damage, so that those of little faith in the jury could see and could believe. Only I don't think they're going to, Mr. Goff.
It doesn't seem to be going very well, does it?
It'll go a good deal worse if you start headbutting the brickwork.
Look, I know the case looks bad, but sometimes the truth is hard to believe. Well, what when you can't convince people of that? Are you supposed to go to prison then for something you haven't done?
All right. But the judge is going to ask what happened to your face now. Are you sure you didn't fall down the stairs?
Fall down the stairs? Oh, with you. Yeah, I think that is what I meant, actually.
Mr. Goff, have you had an accident during the lunchtime recess?
I fell down the spiral staircase, sir.
You fell?
Yes, sir.
Well, if that's what you tell me, I shall have to believe it. But if one more defendant falls down the stairs in my court, or so much as trips and bruises his ego, heads will roll.
think they've beaten him up.
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it, the way judges can distort the facts.
Counsel, if you're ready.
Yes, my lord. I call Mr. Robert Goff.
Call Mr. Robert Goff.
And the next thing I remember is being woken up and told I'd attacked him.
Thank you, Mr. Goff.
Mr. Goff, now you say you retired early on the night in question, without saying your prayers. At about what time did you go to bed?
Somewhere between 8 and 9, I suppose. I don't remember precisely. I wasn't feeling too well.
Ah, yes, due to the alleged blow to the head you had received during the afternoon's alleged rugby match. So naturally you went to the hospital for a check-up as soon as possible?
I just felt that if I could get some sleep, I'd be all right.
Now, did you know that your uncle had made a will in your favour?
No.
But you expected to inherit his estate?
No, he had a saloon.
His legal estate, Mr. Goff, not his estate car. Or is a murder charge a frivolous matter? I ask you again, did you expect to inherit his money?
I suppose so. Eventually, yes.
When he died?
I could hardly inherit it while he was still alive.
Indeed you couldn't, Mr. Goff. The very point I wish to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs. Mrs. Troy.
I'd like to call Mr. Christopher Pringle, my lord.
Call Mr. Chris Tingle.
Mr. Pringle, when you are in the witness box, would you please show some respect for this court and stand up?
I am standing up, Your Honour.
I'll see that you do that.
Mr. Pringle, you were in the team which played a game of rugby against Mr. Goff's team on the day in question. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I play as a front row forward in the stable lads 15.
And this is a position which, despite obvious handicaps of weight and size, you have earned on personal merit.
That is correct, yes.
I believe at one time you even had a trial for Slough Rugby Club. Is that so?
Yes, it is, but I was unable to take up the place that they offered me due to my many racing commitments.
Have you met the defendant on previous occasions, Mr. Pringle?
Yes, last year, when I played in the scrum, hooking for the Aintree Barbarians.
You had reason to remember this encounter?
Yes, he tackled me in what I considered to be an unfair manner, and I was subjected to verbal abuse by members of his team. They called me names connected with my size. Names like skyscraper.
Sizest names, in fact, Mr. Pringle. Quite deplorable. So tell me, what happened on the day in question?
Well, it was a bit of a scrummage for the ball, and Mr. Goff there fell to the ground, and I noticed when the ref's back was turned that he was in slight difficulties, so I tried to help him to his feet.
And were you successful in this?
Only partly, for when I went to kick a divot of mud out of his way for fear that he might trip over it, I sadly misjudged my shot and kicked him in the head instead. Unfortunately, this happened some 4 or 5 times.
What a sad catalogue of misfortunes, Mr. Pringle, for so good a Samaritan.
And what was Mr. Goff's reaction to this?
Well, he went a bit woozy in his mind. He started swearing at me, and he seemed to be under the impression that I was actually kicking him deliberately. I put this down to his confused mental state.
Do you feel, Mr. Pringle, that the succession of kicks which you sadly inflicted through no fault of your own may have caused Mr. Goff to act as he later did?
I do feel that I may bear a certain degree of indirect responsibility, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle.
Mr. Pringle, may I ask if you have any strong religious convictions?
No, just a fine once for speeding.
And have you ever been kicked in the skull in the course of a rugby match or during your racing career, perhaps by a horse?
Yes, many times. The doctors do tell me that at one time or another I've broken practically every bone in my head.
And have you ever attempted to murder your uncle as a result?
No, never. But then I don't have an uncle.
Perhaps it's just as well, Mr. Pringle. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle. Any other witnesses, Mrs. Troy?
Just one, my lord. If I may have a moment? What has happened to our medical expert?
I'm very sorry about this, Mrs. Troy, but he was on his way to the court when he was arrested for curb crawling.
Mrs. Troy, we're wasting time.
Unfortunately, our witness has been delayed, my lord. Some trouble with his car. If I may submit his report in his absence?
Mr. Triggs?
Well, very well, my lord. Just this once.
Hand it round, then take us through it, then, Mrs. Troy. After which, counsel for the prosecution will make his closing speech, members of the jury. Then counsel for the defence will do the same. And I shall give my completely objective, impartial and unbiased summing up, shan't I, Mr. Triggs?
My lord.
Then, members of the jury, it's all in your hands.
His sole defence, members of the jury, is that he walked in his sleep. Now, were the accusations not so serious, this defence would be almost laughable. Ha, 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 ha.
Would you like a glass of water, Mr. Triggs?
No, thank you, my lord. I'm fine. I suggest, members of the jury, that this entire defence is a hodgepodge of lies from start to finish, a medley of misleading statements, a casserole of deceit, a veritable stew of mendacity.
Counsel is implying that the accused is telling fibs, members of the jury.
It is a dangerous and desperate defence of a dangerous and desperate but cunning man caught in the very act of murder. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to return the verdict of guilty. For not only is it the right verdict, but also it is the righteous one. Bless you all, and thank you. I shall remember you in my prayers.
And intent is the essence of the crime. So, members of the jury, in order for you to convict, prosecution must have proved beyond doubt that Mr. Goff intended to kill his uncle. I maintain that the prosecution has not and cannot do this because Mr. Goff simply did not know what he was doing.
Are we listening for pins, Mrs. Troy?
Just pausing for effect, my lord.
Oh, well, if it's had the desired one.
Members of the jury, I ask that Mr. Goff be acquitted. For if his uncle was a victim, so too was Mr. Goff. The victim of a tragic sequence of events over which he had neither control nor knowledge. I ask, therefore, that you bring in the only possible verdict, a verdict of not guilty.
Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
You have found him not guilty. This is the verdict of you all.
It is.
But he did it! He had a duvet down my throat! He tried to kill me!
Order!
This isn't right! This isn't justice!
Mr. Powell, it's the verdict. We can't have everything.
Thanks again, Mrs. Troy. Mr. Bryant, thank you all very much. Well, I might have some celebrating to do.
Yes, of course. Good luck. Another satisfied customer?
Yes. You do believe he's innocent, don't you?
Susan, half the art of being a barrister lies in asking the right question.
Yes.
That wasn't the right question.
Come on, Phil, I'll buy you a drink. Great. Uncle Ted, look, sorry about everything. No hard feelings, eh?
When you've found somewhere to stay, Robert, I'll send your stuff on after I've changed my will.
Why, you miserable old... Cut me out just for that? Well, you watch out then, because next time I'll make sure I'm not interrupted. You understand me? Maybe next time I'll plan things a bit better.
Bob.
Out of the way.
Good job you can't be tried for the same thing twice, isn't it, Arthur?
We defended him, Mrs. Troy.
Someone had to.
But how do we sleep with ourselves?
Well, frankly, Arthur, just at this moment, I haven't got anyone else I can sleep with. But you never know, do you, when your luck will change?